The night had collapsed over the road like a breathless blanket, and in the middle of that sickly silence, only the fragile tremor of a breath that shouldn't be there could be heard. Under the abandoned bridge on Old Route 41, a body lay curled up, lit only by the dying beam of a motorcycle's headlight lying on its side. The air smelled of blood, of rust, and of ancient fear. And when the young man lifted his gaze, his broken lips barely managed to form a desperate whisper. Just end it. But what the Hell's Angels would discover when they finally arrived was not just a destroyed man, but the beginning of a truth no one was prepared to face. Don't leave, because this story proves that brotherhood can be stronger than fear. His name was Liam Mercer, a 24-year-old guy who had spent his life walking among invisible ruins, the kind that make no noise when they collapse, but leave you living among rubble on the inside. He woke up every morning in a room with yellowish walls, where the paint peeled off in strips like memories that no longer belonged to him, looked at himself in the cracked bathroom mirror and saw someone who seemed tired even before the day began. Someone who had already grown used to going unnoticed, to taking up as little space as possible in a world that had never claimed him as its own. He worked in a rusted-out shop on the outskirts of the city, a place where the wind whistled through the metal sheets as if the building itself were sighing in exhaustion, where old cars waited in silence for months, covered in dust, without anyone calling to ask about them, like bodies abandoned in a mechanical morgue. Liam walked among those forgotten machines with his hands stained with grease, the smell of burnt oil clinging to his clothes and skin, trying again and again to repair broken systems, dead engines, gearboxes that resisted coming back to life, as if with each failed repair he were gambling away a small part of his own redemption. Every day, without exception, the owner of the shop barely lifted his eyes from the paperwork to greet him. The customers, when they appeared, spoke while looking over him, as if Liam were just another tool hanging on the wall, useful but invisible. People saw him as an elongated shadow that made no sound, a pair of hands that worked fast, and a voice that almost never interrupted, never as someone worth listening to, never as a man with a story, with fears, with wounds no one had taken the time to see. That night, the weariness weighed on his shoulders like chains of lead as he pulled down the shop's shutter. The street was almost deserted, and the echo of a distant train crossed the black sky like a luminous scar, reminding him there were places he had never been and probably never would be. He was about to turn the key, to lock himself once more inside his routine without surprises, when he heard it. A dying engine in the distance, that irregular, broken sound that only machines make when they're about to give up, followed by a clumsy, desperate screech of brakes and a dull thud against the structure of the nearby bridge. He didn't think. He didn't ask himself if it was his business, if he should call someone else, if it was dangerous.
His body moved before his mind. He grabbed the flashlight he always kept on the counter, feeling the cold metal in the palm of his hand, and ran toward the noise, his boots pounding against the wet asphalt and his heart hammering in his chest as if something ancient and dark were about to open beneath his feet, as if that sound had been a call meant only for him. The walk to the bridge felt longer than usual. Each step echoed in the silence like an omen, and the air seemed denser, charged with an electricity that didn't come from any storm. When he finally arrived, the trembling beam of the flashlight cut through the darkness and revealed a scene that nailed him to the ground. A wrecked motorcycle lying on its side like a slaughtered animal, pieces scattered across the concrete, the metallic smell of gasoline mixed with something heavier, more brutal, the smell of fresh blood.
On the pavement, a young man lay almost unrecognizable, his face swollen, lips split, his body covered in bruises that Liam knew instantly were not from the impact. Old and recent blows that spoke of something far crueler than an accident. By reflex, by instinct, he pulled his phone from his pocket with trembling hands and dialed emergency services. But before he could complete the call, he felt a cold, desperate hand grasp his wrist with a strength that did not match that shattered body. The boy opened his eyes, and in them there was not only physical pain, there was terror, guilt, a kind of animal plea that cut through Liam like a knife. He moved his lips and, with the little voice he had left, spat out words that didn't sound like a simple request for help, but like a sentence that he shouldn't call anyone, that he shouldn't notify, that he should leave him there, that he should just end it. He wasn't asking for rescue. He was asking for an ending. In that instant, under the bridge, with the cold biting his hands and the siren of a train fading into the distance, Liam understood that that night wasn't about a traffic accident, nor about a stranger who'd fallen in the wrong place at the wrong time, but about something much deeper and more dangerous, something that couldn't be fixed with ambulances or police reports. There, in that broken whisper, the real conflict began. The young man was not there by accident. That much was clear even before Liam could think clearly. The marks on his neck had the shape of fingers that had not tried to hold him, but to silence him forever. The old scars that crossed his arms were too regular to be the work of chance, and the deep cut across his side had that surgical, cruel line left only by those who know exactly where to cut so that it hurts more than it kills. That was not the consequence of a skid or a fall or a night of bad luck. It was the grotesque trace of a hell that this boy had survived longer than any human being should endure. And it was right then, when Liam leaned in to remove the blood-soaked vest, that he saw something that tied his stomach in a knot in a way he hadn't felt since he was a child. An old, faded patch, almost torn off completely, clinging to the leather like a relic about to die, but still clear enough to be recognized even in the flickering dimness of his flashlight. It was the emblem of a Hell's Angels chapter that hadn't been seen in that region for years.
men people no longer spoke of out loud. Stories always told with a tone that mixed respect, fear, and the kind of distance reserved only for those who have seen things the rest of the world should never know. When he tried to lift him off the asphalt, the boy opened his eyes for just an instant, but in that instant, he murmured broken names, routes that sounded like maps to places no one wanted to enter, warnings spoken with the desperate urgency of someone who knows he will not get a second chance. Because it wasn't one or two people chasing him, but several men, several shadows with the same intention, to eliminate him before he could escape the circle that had held him prisoner for far too long.
Liam carried him to the shop, almost by sheer force, his heart pounding so hard it felt like a siren inside his chest, and he slammed the door shut with an instinctive movement, as if that rusty bolt could hold back the ghosts that followed the boy. In the yellowish, flickering light that made the shop look even older and sadder than usual, Liam improvised a makeshift bed with blankets, cleaned wounds he wasn't sure he should even touch, and tried to find some kind of order in the chaos the young man spilled between ragged whispers. The entire night passed like a fever dream. The boy, with broken lips and a nearly extinguished voice, recounted fragments of a story that didn't seem real, although every word was accompanied by living proof on his skin. He spoke of a group that had taken him under their wing to turn him into a tool, that had beaten him when he obeyed and nearly destroyed him when he dared to question. Men who didn't punish him for being a biker, but for having the audacity to refuse to participate in something so dark that even now, as he mentioned it, he seemed to run out of air, as if the mere memory were enough to paralyze his soul. Among all those broken pieces, all those disjointed episodes that fell apart as soon as they formed, there was only one phrase that remained consistent, a line that returned again and again with the force of a prophecy that couldn't be ignored. They will come, but not the ones you think, the real ones. They will come. And every time he repeated it, his voice trembled in a different way, not from physical pain, but from a fear so deep it seemed to have accompanied him for months, maybe years. The shop, which normally was a refuge of metallic noises and the smell of oil, became that night a silent sanctuary where only irregular breathing could be heard, the dripping of rain on the roof, and every now and then the distant echo of some stray dog. And just when the darkness began to thin, when dawn cut its way through the clouds like a slow knife, Liam, exhausted but alert, heard a sound that had not been part of his reality for a very long time. A deep roar that seemed to rise from the ground, a heavy, low vibration that passed through the shop walls and seeped into his bones like an unavoidable omen, a roar that never came alone and that, in a matter of seconds, multiplied into several layers, several frequencies, until it became a perfect, synchronized, immense, mechanical symphony moving in from the horizon as if the road itself were waking up. It wasn't one engine, it was many, and they were coming for him. The Hell's Angels arrived like a storm of steel that didn't need to announce itself. A collective movement so precise it seemed choreographed by the asphalt itself. The roar that preceded them faded as they slowly advanced, lining up in front of the shop until they formed a perfect semicircle, sealing the entrance as if they were a living wall, a barricade of leather, metal, and silence. One by one, they shut off their engines, not abruptly, but with that ritual solemnity only men who have seen too many battles truly understand. That moment when the world seems to hold its breath before revealing itself. They did not shout. They did not demand explanations. They did not look for culprits in that moment. They simply observed with that intensity that cuts through the skin and reaches straight to the soul, a gaze that said they had come because someone had laid a hand on one of their own, because a brother lay stretched between life and death, and because in the code they carried sewn into their leather there was no greater offense than betrayal. There, in front of the rusted shop, without a single raised voice, they made it clear that someone had crossed a line that could not be forgiven, a line that marked the before and after of any story. The leader took a step forward, a man with a white beard that fell like a trail across his chest, his skin marked by the sun of thousands of roads, and his gaze hardened by things anyone else would rather forget. He didn't need to raise his voice to dominate the space. His mere presence carried the weight of a sentence. He stopped in front of Liam, whose hands felt cold and mouth dry, and yet the leader only inclined his head slightly, thanking him with an almost unbearable calm for having prevented the boy from dying alone under a bridge. It was not an exaggerated or ceremonial thank you, but one born from a kind of respect that is not given lightly. Then the man crouched beside the wounded rider, resting a large, heavy, almost paternal hand on his chest, as if with that gesture he could anchor him to life, hold him a little longer, keep him from slipping toward that place many never returned from. It was then that the young man opened his eyes, two trembling abysses where something like hope still stirred, perhaps for the first time in a very long time. He breathed with difficulty, as if every word were a fragment torn from his own soul, but still he spoke, because he understood this was his only chance to make sure the truth didn't die with him.
The angels leaned in to listen, their shadows forming a ring of gravity around the boy. And he told them, in a broken, tormented voice, the precise chain of betrayals, who had handed him over, the real names behind the torment, where the men who had hunted him were hiding, what they were planning, and why his escape had turned into a death sentence. He didn't embellish anything, didn't omit anything, didn't soften anything. He spoke like someone who knows he won't have the strength to repeat it. When his words ran out and silence reclaimed the shop, no one needed to interpret them. There were no questions, no doubts, no tense exchanges. It was the kind of silence that only forms when men who live by a code understand that the decision has been made long before it's spoken aloud. Brief glances, barely perceptible nods, minimal gestures that were the equivalent of ironclad promises. They didn't speak,
but everything had been said. And in the middle of that silence charged with destiny, the road seemed to tilt toward them, as if the night itself had also understood what was coming next. If you believe loyalty still means something, subscribe to Hell's Road, because stories like this are far from over.
The angels gathered in front of the shop as if the ground itself had told them where to stand, forming an imperfect but firm circle, a space that vibrated with an almost sacred tension. Each one began to prepare his machine and his body with that silent precision only men accustomed to acting without losing themselves in rage possess. They adjusted their gloves with slow, sure movements, checked their chains like someone inspecting a piece of memory, wiped down their helmets with the ritual calm of those who understand that every gesture carries symbolic weight, as if all of this were not the prelude to a confrontation, but the repetition of an ancient rite passed down from generation to generation through glances, scars, and endless nights on the road. There was no rage in them. Rage is noise, disorder, blind impulses, and the angels were not there to roar at the void, but to fulfill a responsibility that had been tattooed on their backs for decades. What moved in their mannerisms was purpose, a steady direction, a sense of justice that needed no laws or permissions, only the intimate certainty that when one brother falls, the others rise as a single body. They did not shout, they did not hurry, they did not seek theatrics. They prepared themselves with the serenity of those who have already accepted what is coming. Liam watched them from the shop's threshold, his hands still stained with dried blood and old oil, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years. An inner alignment he had no name for, as if all the broken pieces inside him had suddenly found the same point to fix themselves on. The sound of gloves tightening, the metallic snap of a chain being pulled taut, the dull shine of helmets, all of it resonated inside him like a heartbeat that had been asleep for far too long. And in that instant, he understood he was not just observing someone else's ritual. He was witnessing a way of life that in some forgotten corner of his soul he had always admired without allowing himself to admit it. It was then that the leader, his solid figure silhouetted against the faint light of dawn, raised his hand in a gesture that needed no words, because among the angels, gestures carry more force than any speech. That movement was enough for all the men to mount their bikes, start their engines, and let the air vibrate with a power that seemed to rise from the earth itself. They wore their colors like armor, symbols of loyalty stitched into leather. And you can carry that same spirit. The official Hell's Road store is linked in the description. And when the leader lowered his hand, the engines responded like a single heart of metal, roaring not out of intimidation, but out of pure determination, cutting through the stillness of dawn, advancing in formation toward a destiny that did not seek revenge, but answers that were already written somewhere out on the road. The confrontation took place in an old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, a building whose flaking walls seemed to have absorbed decades of smothered screams, forgotten secrets, and silences that weighed more than any story ever told. The broken lights inside flickered with that sickly glow that makes everything look like a nightmare about to wake up. And under that trembling flicker moved the men who had provoked that whole chain of horror. Men who in their arrogance had come to believe no one would ever come for them, that they could hide their sins behind damp walls and old shadows, as if the world were too big for the truth to ever catch them. But the truth didn't arrive with words or warnings. It arrived with sound, that deep, multiple, growing roar that first vibrated in the floor as if the earth trembled, and then seeped through the cracks of the warehouse with a clarity that froze their blood long before they could peek out to see what was happening. The engines announced the sentence before the sentence had a shape, a sound that carried no rage, but the kind of resolve that exists only in men who have already decided there will be no turning back. When the doors burst open, the Hell's Angels entered as a single shadow, a united mass moving at the same pace, with the same breath, with the same silent determination that makes even the bravest feel that something greater has just walked into the room. They had not come to spill blood, because violence is too short a language to explain what they carried with them. They had come to confront something much deeper, the corruption of those who had used their name as a weapon, those who had dishonored the leather others had defended with their lives, those who had taken brotherhood and turned it into a shield for abuse, betrayal, and fear. The leader advanced until he stood only a few steps from the renegades. The flickering light cast strange shadows over his white beard, and his gaze carried the weight only men who have buried too many brothers can bear. When he spoke, his voice was not a shout, but a blade that cut through lies, pride, and cowardice without needing to rise in volume. He named those who had hurt the boy, pointed them out without trembling, quietly reminded them of the code they had broken, and made them understand in silence that there was no hole deep enough to hide from what they themselves had unleashed. What followed was not violence, but justice, a hard, blunt, stripped-down justice, one that is carried out on moral ground before the physical one, an act that only those who live by a code recognize without needing explanations. They were disarmed not by brute force, but because their will shattered when they found themselves surrounded by men who didn't need to throw a single punch to prove they had every right to be there. They were exposed face to face to the consequences of their actions, forced to understand that the darkness they had turned to for so long, the darkness they thought protected them, was the same darkness now devouring them without mercy. When the confrontation ended, the renegades had no weapons left, No voice, no trace of that invincibility they had used to crush others. They were handed over to a fate they themselves had built, trapped under the exact weight of their decisions, while the angels, without needing to celebrate or declare victory, knew they had restored a balance that should never have been broken. The angels returned to the shop just as dawn began to tear through the darkness. That moment when the light is still timid and the world seems suspended between the night that refuses to leave and the day that has not yet been born. Liam waited for them in silence, leaning against the doorframe, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, but wide open with something he hadn't felt in a long time. The certainty that he was no longer facing the world alone. Inside the shop, the wounded young man was still breathing, very weak, almost imperceptible, but alive. And that simple detail, that fragile thread of life that refused to break, was enough to loosen, just a little, the tension that had built up over hours. When the angels saw the boy, there were no celebrations or outbursts of relief. Instead, something much deeper happened. One by one, they removed their helmets with a slow, solemn gesture, not as a farewell or a greeting, but as an act of respect for what Liam had done, without asking for reward or recognition. They weren't honoring the boy, though he also deserved it, but the man who had had the courage to stop on the road, to carry a shattered body, to face the entire night with the sheer force of his humanity, without knowing who was coming behind, without knowing what dark forces he was provoking by intervening in something that was never his to begin with. The leader walked up to Liam and for a long moment simply looked at him, as if trying to decipher how much broken life that quiet young man carried inside. The one who had shown more courage in one night than many show in an entire lifetime. Finally, he rested a firm hand on his shoulder, a heavy, weathered hand that conveyed not only strength, but a silent gratitude worth far more than any rehearsed phrase. And in a low voice, with that rough tone only men who have survived long enough to understand the essential differences possess, he told him that on the road there are two types of men: the ones who survive and the ones who save. Making it clear with that simple judgment that in the eyes of the club, Liam belonged to the second group. When the morning fully broke through and the engine started again, this time not with urgency, but with the calm of a mission accomplished, the angels left in formation, cutting through the mist with that solemnity that only accompanies those who carry with them a truth that no longer needs to be spoken. The roar of their motorcycles slowly faded, losing itself among the hills like a promise that is never broken. And when the echo disappeared, Liam felt that the shop, with its flaking walls and smell of old oil, no longer looked as run down as before, nor that dawn as cold, nor his life as empty. Because something had changed. Because that place which had always been a refuge for what was broken, for the first time felt like a home. Some roads lead to redemption, others to memory. If you want to keep the flame alive, the official Hell's Road store is in the description. Days passed, and every time Liam heard an engine in the distance, he found himself smiling without realizing it. not because he expected them to come back, but because he understood something he had never known. Brotherhood is not blood, nor metal, nor noise. It is a silent promise that travels from man to man, from story to story. Sometimes life drags you to the edge. Other times it finds you under a dark bridge. But if you pay attention, there's always an engine in the distance reminding you that you are not alone. This is just one of the many forgotten legends of the road. Subscribe to Hell's Road and ride with us into the next story.